PSA is once again backlogged. They have just announced that they have so many new submissions coming in the door that they are having trouble keeping up with the processing of them, and their turnaround times are maybe getting a little bit slower as a result. So what does this mean for you? If you want to grade your cards right now, is PSA still the place you should go? Or should you consider SGC, BGS, CGC, or other options out there? We're going to bring our grading expert, Joe Davis from Got Baseball Cards, on the show today, and we're going to break down the state of grading here in January 2025. This episode is brought to you by Arena Club. Arena Club is an innovative platform featuring grading and authentication, vaulting, and digital pack openings. Be sure to check out the amazing items up for auction right now at Arena Club. From rare cards to top-tier collectibles, there's something for you at Arena Club. Download the Arena Club app today by searching Arena Club in the App Store on your phone, and then use promo code SCI for 10% off your first purchase of cards at Arena Club. Joe, welcome back on the show.
Great to be back, Geoff.
Yeah, those of you out there have probably seen Joe quite a bit before. We are today in his card shop, the Got Baseball Cards card shop in Loganville, Georgia. About an hour drive, a little bit under an hour drive from where Cards HQ is, just on a different side of Atlanta.
Yep.
But it's a great shop, and we actually just did a whole tour of the shop. You're going to get to see that on a future Sports Card Investor video, so stay tuned for that. But Joe, what we're here to talk about today is your favorite topic, grading.
Absolutely.
And I know it's such a big part, the intake of grading and helping customers with grading submissions is such a big part of what you do here at your card shop.
Yes, it is. And we've been a group submitter dating back to 1998. So we continue to try to improve processes to help collectors with their grading submissions.
Yeah, it's super cool. And for those of you who haven't used Joe's service before, if you go to sportscardinvestor.com and click grading in the main menu bar, if you want to submit your cards through Joe, you can do it all through our website, sportscardinvestor.com, click grading. And of course, if you're in the Atlanta area, you can come into Cards HQ, or you can go to Got Baseball Cards, and all the cards will funnel through Joe's operation.
Yep.
We'll talk more about that later, Joe, but right now I want to start by talking about PSA. So maybe it's starting to feel a little bit like 2021 again. I don't know.
Let's hope not.
Let's hope not. Of course, that brings back memories of PSA.
The shutdown.
Shutting down for months and months and months and months because they got so backlogged.
Yeah, 18-month backlog at one point, remember?
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I remember during that, them specifically saying that when they finally decided to shut down, Nat Turner said they decided to shut down because they had so many packages that people had shipped in, sitting in warehouse rooms, that they had no ability to even open and verify what was inside and start to get them processed for potentially months.
Right.
And they're like, we got to stop this. This is crazy.
Yeah.
People are sending their cards and we can't even look at them for months.
Yeah, I think they hit about 13 million, something like that.
Yeah, like something crazy, So when you see the news that we saw earlier this week, where PSA on Monday said, we're starting to get a little bit backlogged again. I'm sure it's nothing like it was back in 2021, but they did say that there was a rush of grading orders being submitted in late 2024 to end 2024 and to start 2025. So presumably, probably from around Christmas time through now, there's been a lot of people submitting cards for grading, and there's PSA starting to feel the weight of it. They're all of a sudden going, oh boy, we got a lot of packages that we haven't been able to open yet. And customers, I assume, are reaching out and saying, did you get my package? Why isn't it even registered in your system yet in terms of when you got it?
Right.
So PSA put the word out saying, we're a little bit backlogged. Check with your shipper, and as long as your shipper shows that it was delivered, then we're good. And we got it, and it's locked up, but we just haven't had the opportunity to process it yet. They said that they're going to be increasing staffing levels, and they're going to be bringing new technology into play over the course of the quarter to allow them to more quickly record shipments that are incoming. But at the moment, they're backlogged. And I assume this means that we're going to see some slower turnaround times on things. Does it surprise you that we're sitting here in 2025 and we're still having a grading company, PSA, telling us we're backlogged, we're running a little bit behind.
I'm not surprised at all, because the growth of our industry continues, especially as we've seen like in the TCG sector. The growth in grading there has been just extraordinary over the last year. And so even though they have continued to ramp up, and their number of staff relative to where it was years ago is exponentially more, but yet they're still trying to keep up. They're continuing to be in catch-up mode. And so it's exciting, because that's, as a group submitter, we see it here. We see the volume of things coming in. We see the demand for graded cards. Of course, in our retail store, we see that demand. But it's very encouraging to me. I'd much rather them be falling behind than there's not demand, because if there's not demand for grading, then we've got a whole nother set of issues. So for me, yes, it may be another week or two per order, but that's exciting to me to see it.
Yeah, I mean, it does speak to the overall health of the industry,
Correct.
I would say.
Yeah.
And when we were doing the tour here earlier today, you mentioned to me that this year so far, obviously we're just a couple of weeks into January, but you said you guys have been very, very busy here. We've been busy over at Cards HQ. So
Yes.
it feels like 2025 for the industry as a whole is off to a pretty good start. And I'd say this PSA announcement probably speaks to that.
Yeah, I mean, daily, just today as we were here, I looked in the back and there was tubs of submissions that we need to process. So that's encouraging to see. We appreciate everyone who uses our services. And so we look forward to a great 2025 and processing tens of thousands of submissions.
So that brings me to my next question. Since the last time we got together, we've done one of these kind of state of grading episodes. We do a couple of these a year.
Right.
It's been several months since our last one. How has the grading landscape changed? The second half of 2024, kind of going into 2025 here, what's different than what it might have been a year ago when people were kind of considering their, how to grade or where to grade back then?
Well, I think the last time we talked, there was the change with SGC where they had just been bought out by collectors, and
Yep.
we were curious as, okay, what's going to happen with them? We've actually seen very little change, which is a positive, because they've maintained quick turnaround, very affordable pricing, and demand for their cards, especially in the vintage sector. So there has been very little change there. We've seen a lot of growth with CGC, especially and almost specifically in the TCG area. BGS is still struggling. We've had this talk 100 times. I still think they need to adapt to the scale that the rest of the industry with a 10-point scale. So BGS is in fourth place by far right now. So I think they need something. They're under new ownership now. So maybe some changes will come there to kickstart them as far as increasing their volume. PSA continues to be the leader far and away, continues to have the record sales, the record volume, and it's still by far the largest percentage. All the other companies combined don't add up to what we do just with PSA submissions.
So let's start by talking about PSA. They're obviously the big dogs in the industry. They're the ones who say they're a little bit backlogged right now. Now, it could also be that some of these other companies are starting to see a surge in submissions as well, and they just haven't announced it yet. I know SGC got real busy around the start of last year. They got a big backlog, and so I don't know if that's going to be happening to them again at the start of this year as well. PSA's pricing, they've made a couple of price changes over the course of the last year. Nothing too significant.
No.
It's been a couple of dollars here and there. What are you seeing right now from PSA in terms of pricing?
Well, we've just lowered what we're offering to the public on Pokemon and other TCG down to $17 a card. But that is with a max value of $199 per card. And so we expect a flood of new submissions on that. For sports, we're currently offering $19 if they're doing 20 or more cards at a time. And of course, with all those services, no matter which grading company, we offer the pre-screening option as well. But I expect to see the biggest growth in the TCG sector. The pricing's a little bit cheaper. And we know, I was just looking at the gem rate reports, and the number 1 and 2 graded characters and or athletes were Charizard and the Pikachu. So
they beat out Wemby, huh?
They beat out Wemby by thousands in the last month.
Okay.
So that's just indicative of the demand for graded Pokemon cards right now.
Yeah, and I imagine, this partnership that PSA announced with GameStop, they announced that several months ago now, and it's, been kind of up and operating for a bit of time. What I've heard is that partnership has worked out really well on the TCG side, that a large percentage of the volume of what they're getting submitted through GameStop is TCG. And so I think maybe there's just that, plus in addition, the TCG market has just been really hot recently.
Yes.
I mean, these recent Pokemon releases have gone berserk, and everyone seems to be clamoring for them. So I think maybe a combination of those things is just raising awareness of TCG grading and more demand for grading services for TCG.
Right. Yeah. One of the biggest areas where we have failed to get our name out in that, because we handle so many sports card submissions, we're like, hey guys, we handle TCG also. And so we're trying to do a better job of making collectors aware of that we can help them with the same level of services on non-sports, TCG, any of that area.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very interesting. So last time we talked, PSA was clearly the number one choice in a lot of grading scenarios. And if you look at the numbers, as you said earlier, they're right now way out in front of the other grading companies. When people come to you, Joe, and they say, hey, I want to, I got some cards I want to grade. What types of cards are you just saying automatically send it to PSA? And then what types of cards might you consider one of the other options?
Well, a lot of times it boils down to what the customer or the collector submitter wants out of that. Do they need it back right away? Do they need liquidity to get it sold immediately? Can they wait a couple of months? So sometimes we start with how quickly do you need the card back? And are you looking for, is it just your PC and you just want it in a respectable slab and at maybe at a cheaper price point? Or are you only wanting to maximize value? Now, when we see, let's take vintage, for instance, high grade vintage, 8 quality, 7, 8 quality. Typically, we're going to recommend PSA. Or should say probably always we're going to recommend PSA. However, on the mid-grade vintage, often SGC is also a really good choice, especially if they want the card back at a little bit quicker pace. With Pokemon, we're seeing, again, CGC has really moved up with demand for their slabs there. But we've also had some collectors coming lately with BGS, wanting BGS Pokemon grades, and they said they do really well because they have the shot at the black label.
Yeah.
And so rounded Pokemon cards have a really good shot at getting high grades if they haven't been handled. So it really varies with what the card is, what the desire of the submitter is, how soon do they need it back. Are they just wanting liquidity? Are they wanting to hold it for a long time? I mean, I have slabs from every company, and I have no problem buying slabs from any of those companies. However, depending on what my purpose of buying it is, if it's buying for resale is one thing, if it's buying from a personal collection, it's another. So, again, they're all respected, but obviously we're doing far more volume still with PSA.
Yeah,
across the board.
That makes sense. So you started off by saying, first question you might ask is like how quickly you need it back. So I assume that's a question where is SGC the fastest right now? Do they have the advantage over the other three companies?
They do. Yeah. I mean, they're all still turning stuff 2-3 weeks sometimes.
Yeah.
So and for entry level submissions, that's incredible.
Yeah.
That's amazing service to be able to turn stuff that quickly.
And PSA oscillates. I've had some of the bulk value orders turn in less than 30 days, and others I've seen closer to kind of a 2-month turnaround.
Right.
And I expect we're going to see over the next few months all those bulk orders probably be closer to 2 months plus with the news that PSA has this backlog now on bringing in processing new submissions as they come in the door.
Yeah, if they're trying to get out front of it, it's almost like they know what's coming, and so they would rather, which I appreciate that. I would rather them say, hey, just to give you a heads up, things are going to be a little bit slower than just apologizing on the back end that, hey, sorry, we didn't meet the turn time. So I'm impressed that they're owning it and saying, look, thank you for the business, but therefore we're backed up. So
yeah.
But again, a good sign for the industry.
A good sign for the industry. So if you want your cards back quickly, if you and you don't want to pay a lot to get your cards back quickly, that's when SGC, it sounds like, it becomes an attractive option.
Yes.
Mid-grade vintage, you mentioned, definitely a consideration for SGC as well. The other thing you said was you would ask the customer, what's the purpose of their card, right? Are they trying to maximize resale value, in which case PSA is often the best choice, or are they trying to just grade this for their PC? In which case, I guess that kind of opens up a variety of options there, right?
Yeah.
SGC is going to be a good low price option. Some people love the feel of the Becket BGS slabs. Some people love the clarity of the CGC slabs.
Right.
And so I guess, if it's just for a PC perspective, it's a little bit of a, hey, kind of pick what you want here, because each company has some pros and cons.
Yeah, definitely. And so I'm curious. I'm excited for what the landscape's going to be this year. I'm curious what changes might happen with BGS, possibly. We're hopeful for that, that they would land on the same scale everyone else is using now. I'm also just curious to see how quickly PSA does ramp up. If PSA could ever get their bulk services down to like a 30-day, they would be so hard. It would be very hard for the others to compete.
Yeah.
Because that's the biggest challenge they've got right now is you send it in and 2 months later you get it back.
Yeah.
So whereas some of the others may be quicker, however the resale's not there. So if PSA could get to that point where they could turn things in 30 days, imagine that they already have a dominant position in the industry. Imagine where they would be at if they could get there.
Yeah, and I had the president of PSA, Ryan, on this show several months ago, and he said that was an internal goal of PSA's, was every single service level, including bulk, a maximum of a 30-day turnaround. That was an internal goal they wanted to work towards. It seems like maybe they're going slightly in the opposite direction of that at the moment, but they got some work to do if they're really going to get there. But I do like that goal. I agree with you. Like the difference between, so if you're going to get your order turned from SGC in 2 to 3 weeks, you wait an extra week or two for PSA. I think most people, no matter the circumstance, are going to wait that extra week or two for PSA. But if it's the difference between 2 to 3 weeks at SGC and
2 to 3 months,
2 to 3 months at PSA, that's a considerably bigger difference. And that does give you something to think about a little bit more, depending on what your use case of your card is.
Yeah, especially if you're a reseller, because I've run financial scenarios how many times can you flip a card or flip those dollars, I should say, if you're getting them back. You may not get the maximum resale, but if you're flipping that card at a profit, then you take those dollars, buy more stuff, you turn those again. If you can turn X amount of dollars multiple times in the same period of time, do you come out better? There's different financial scenarios depending on how many dollars we're talking about they're really cool to analyze.
Yeah, and there's also something to be said for getting the cards back quicker allows you to potentially time the market a little bit better.
Exactly.
I mean, right now, for example, we just had Prism Football come out recently. At the moment, Jaden Daniel cards are very, very hot, right? So if you had opened up packs of Prism Football and graded your Jaden Daniels cards with SGC, you probably have them back right around now. And you could be selling them into Washington having just won their first playoff game in a long time and about to play another playoff game. Whereas if you open Prism Football and sent those cards to PSA at a bulk service level, they're all sitting at PSA right now. You're not going to see those cards back until Washington's season is
Probably
over.
Yeah.
Probably, unless they miraculously get all the way to the Super Bowl, then maybe. But otherwise, you're not going to see those cards back until their season's over.
Right.
So that can make a big difference.
Yeah.
That's something to think about for sure. We've talked about PSA a little bit. You mentioned some scenarios for SGC, CGC. Do they TCG obviously is big for CGC. Do you see them gaining any traction on the sports side? I know they're still trying. I know, for example, they recently formed a partnership with Fanatics Collect, where if you send your cards off to Fanatics Collect's vault, CGC now offers like 24-hour turnaround. So they're trying certain things.
Well, they just partner with JSA.
That's
on
right,
the
too.
autograph authentication.
That's right. So they're not giving up on sports cards.
No.
It seems like they're continuing to
try.
reinvest and try.
Yeah.
but their sports card grading numbers are small, very small compared to their TCG numbers, and very small compared to even SGC on the sports card side, for example.
Yeah, we see here, we see the most demand for PSA. Second most demand is SGC because we're doing more sports than anything. And right now we see very little demand for sports card grading with CGC, though. Again, they're trying different things to improve that, which I, applaud them for the efforts they're putting forth, but not seeing it right now on the sports side.
It's interesting, the mindset of collectors and how these things shift. PSA obviously has done a lot of good things to build their reputation up over many years, but CGC is still a very respected company.
Yes.
They're owned by a big private equity group. They have graded, comic books.
They're number one in comics.
Yeah. So they're a very, very respected company. And so it's kind of interesting, like how collectors on the sports side will accept certain things or not accept certain things, and how that mentality changes or doesn't change in some cases over time. There's not really a good reason for CGC to be that far behind the other companies in terms of sports grading, because they have the capability of assessing a card well, just like SGC or PSA does, and authenticating the card. And their slabs, some might argue their slabs are nicer, but they've just never quite caught on the sports side.
I think it's that part of it is they're still so new to the sports card market. The TCG side, often the same type of buyers who collect and grade comics might be grading TCG cards, and they know CGC from the comic book industry, but CGC is very new to the sports card industry, whereas you've got the legacy of PSA since the early 90s, SGC since 98, BGS since the early 2000s. So all those companies have been established in the sports card grading market for 2+ decades, whereas CGC has not.
Yeah.
They came out as CSG, and then they rebranded it to CGC, and they changed their holder twice.
And they changed their grading scale too.
Yes.
They did what we think.
That was a good move.
Yeah, they did what we think Becket should do. When they came out with their grading scale, they had a 9.5 Gem Mint. And then they kind of backed off of that and said, no, we're going to go to a 10 Gem Mint. We're going to go away from the Becket scale, and we're going to move to the PSA scale, is kind of what they did.
And look at how their numbers have grown since then.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I agree. And so that leads us to Becket, right? The fourth place company. Amazing to think that they're fourth place. And I know we've talked about this before, you having the history of being a bulk grading submitter to both PSA and Becket for many, many years. One of the first with these companies to be doing this. It's got to be a little bit amazing to you. If you would have told yourself 15 years ago that fast forward 15 years and PSA is going to be 20 times dominant over Becket in terms of grading numbers, would you have ever believed that?
No, I could have never believed the disparity. I was looking at the numbers, and I think, PSA's grading about as much in 2 weeks as BGS is doing in a year.
Unbelievable.
So don't quote me on those exact, but ballpark. And so, however, I think there's hope for BGS. They've got new ownership. I know some of the people in place now. There's some true, very smart card people in place at the grading division now. And so they've had some there in the past, but they had that period where they had been bought and some others were there. And I talked with a lot of those who were there temporarily, and some didn't really know. They didn't understand the market. And so some of the guys they have there now, I've known for years, and they know the card market. They know collectors. And so I think there's hope there. The key is going to be, will this new ownership group put the money behind the brand so that they can improve? Because their biggest thing is they've got to improve turnaround time. They've got to hopefully revisit the grading scale. But their turnaround time is lagging so much right now that, and I've been very blunt with them recently. I had talks with them like, you've got to improve turnaround time, and they're going to become like a forgotten fourth. They're falling so far behind. And so that's one of the biggest. They've got to improve turnaround time and hopefully change the scale too. I think that's the two biggest things. And the only way you improve turnaround time is improving infrastructure, hiring more people, to be able to turn the thing. So hopefully that will happen for the benefit of collectors.
I really hope it does. I totally agree. I've got some really big important cards in BGS labs, and a lot of people do because a lot of people, BGS was their grading company of choice with the best cards that they owned,
right?
10, 20 years ago. I mean, they were number one. I mean, I still, the story, we've told it on the show a few times, but the guy who crossed over a 1986 Fleer Michael Jordan PSA 10 to a BGS 9.5 and was happy with it.
He was ecstatic. Yeah, I took it to the National, and I paid for a review for him. It came back a 9.5, and I texted him. He was just, "Oh, this is wonderful news! Wonderful news!" He was so excited, and no one would do that right now.
Oh, I mean, you can't even. It's hard to even fathom that right now. Like, it's hard to even think that there was a time in the hobby, not that many years ago, when that was like, what was done and what was accepted. But
I mean, we just sold a 9.5 Jordan, and I think it was the highest sale on eBay for one of our consigners for $45,000. And I'm not even sure what 10s or PSA 10s are right now. But
180, 200,000.
Yeah, so 4 times as much.
Incredible, absolutely incredible. I do hope BGS, like with as you said, they had the ownership change. The old owner, all the stuff that's come out about him and the fraud and oh my gosh,
not good news.
No, not at all. So thank goodness it seems to be shifting away from that guy, and hopefully this is opening up the door for new investment, new thinking, that kind of thing to help kind of remodernize Becket, reinvest in the company, like improve their turnaround times. I'm completely with you. They got to change the grading scale. I think 9.5 being their gem mint grade is not working. It's in
antiquated.
This day and age. It's not working. It was great 10 years ago. It's not working with the new collectors that have come into the hobby over the last 5 years, which now constitutes a majority of the hobby, right?
Yeah, exactly.
They want to see a 10. To them, a 10 is a gem mint score.
Yeah.
It's the standard, right? Not a 9.5.
Right.
And so a 9.5 just feels inferior. And so I'm with you. You and I are in agreement that they got to change that.
Yeah.
Will they? I don't know. But whatever they do, I hope that they do find their way back to relevance somehow.
I hope
here.
So.
Hopefully it's a good year for them.
It'd be good for the hobby. I mean, I always say, I have good working relationships with all 4 companies, but, if they all had the same scale, they would stand on their own merit of turnaround and customer service and everything else. Right now, it's confusing for the whole industry when one of the 4 best-known grading companies doesn't have the same standard that the other 3 do.
Yeah.
So I think it'd be good for BGS, but I think it would be good for the industry just to truly standardize that across the board with all of the industry leaders.
All right. Well, I hope that happens. Maybe this will be the year that Becket,
we'll see.
Becket does something about it and wakes up and decides to modernize. Okay. For anybody out there at home thinking about, okay, it's 2025. I got a stack of cards. I've been thinking about grading for a while. Now I got to do something with it, right? Mm-hmm. What do they, before they even submit, whether they submit through your bulk grading service here at Got Baseball Cards or send them off to PSA, what advice would you give them in terms of kind of going through their cards and just deciding, are these worth submitting or not?
Well, what we do here, and this is the same thing I recommend for collectors, we basically do 2 different processes going on. You bring in a card. First of all, we call it a value screen, where we literally look through it. Someone brings in a collection. We're like, okay, is there any just raw card book value for these cards? Because if it's a 50-cent card, you're not going to want to put $19 or $20, whatever the number is, in which company. So first we screen for value. Does this even logically make sense that you would ever want to grade this card? Then after we've segmented stuff that way, same thing I would recommend a collector do. We then do the actual screening of the condition of the card. We examine it under magnification. We examine it under specific lighting that we use in our grading rooms to help pinpoint issues with a card. Then once they've passed that, then they're considered for grading. But that's why we, as I was showing you, we have thousands of cards we've rejected that collectors sent us where we screened them out. That's a paid service we offer. But if a collector is just wanting to do that on their own, first thing, you got to examine the value. Second, you've got to examine the condition. And then if it passes both of those, then it makes sense to then take the next steps to mail them off.
Yeah. In terms of value, is there a rule of thumb you use? Like if the raw value, or maybe it's if a PSA 10 value or something is above a certain amount, then it's worth it. If it's below a certain amount, then it's really not.
For me, it's got to a point where it's instinctive. Like if I'm looking at an old, like take a high number from the 67 set, which all the high numbers are tough. It can be a no name, but if it's really high grade, if that's an 8 or higher, those are going to be worth grading. And raw value, is only in the teens. But if you take a $15 modern card and it's got one little scratch, so it's going to be an 8, you're not going to want to send that in.
Yeah.
So it varies with the year. It varies with, the demand for that particular player or that particular set. 52 tops, for example, almost any common we get in that looks like a 4 or 5 or better, we're going to send in because there's demand for that slab in graded condition, even in the lower grade. So certain sets, of course, are more popular than others. Basically, the newer the card, the nicer it needs to be. Because when we screen here, we screen for 9s and 10s if it's like an ultra-modern card. So that basically means if we catch any flaw with corners, centering, edges, surface, we're not going to pass it. So it's so funny. We've actually had complaints that we were too strict on pre-screening. We had a submitter recently say, hey, I sent in 2 of the cards you rejected, and one got a 9, one got a 10. How did that happen? We're like, well, we're sorry. We were more strict than PSA on that one. Would you rather us be more strict or more lenient? Do you want to get a lot of 8s back? So we try to be very strict. We try to follow about the standards that they would for what we're looking for. And again, there's a greater allowance on vintage, of course, especially because there's more upside. And that's the reason. 8s on vintage, worth a lot. 8s on modern, you wish you never sent it.
Yeah, unfortunately, even PSA 9s on most ultra modern cards tend to sell for somewhere in the neighborhood of the raw price. There are some exceptions for particularly high end cards,
right?
But for most ultra modern cards, it seems like it's kind of a 10 or a bust in terms of getting your value back out of the grade.
Unless it's a higher dollar. Yeah. But if you're talking base, if you're sending in a base Prism CJ Stroud or Jaden, whoever, you're hoping for those 10s, which is why we have to be super strict on those, especially even on the centering, because if there's too much variance on the centering, you're not going to get a 10.
Yeah.
So,
And it's all things to look for sure. And we've done some videos on the Sports Card Investor channel in the past where we've gone through how to evaluate cards in more detail. Obviously, you got to look at centering, you got to look at the edges, you got to look at the corners, and you got to look at the surface. And we've done some videos where we explain how to look at all of that. So we won't go into that bit today, but for anybody out there who would like to educate themselves more, go to the Sports Card Investor YouTube channel and search for grading, and you'll see some videos that Joe Davis and I did in years past about how to submit to PSA, and it will show that whole process in more detail. For people who are listening who may be interested in submitting through your bulk grading service, what are the reasons for them to submit through you versus going direct to PSA?
Well, using PSA as an example, we don't charge any monthly. We don't charge a club fee.
Right, a collector's club fee.
Correct.
You got to join with PSA if you want to get their bulk pricing. Yeah.
Right. And we often, because of the volume that we do process with PSA, we often see a little bit better turnaround time. But the biggest thing is, we have actual account reps specifically to us that we can contact. You're not calling and holding for 2 hours to talk to someone about your order. We actually send automated updates every time a card, someone's invoice moves from one stage to the other, so they're always in the loop. But the biggest thing is the services we talked about of helping those collectors screen out what's not worth grading. I mean, we've saved collectors hundreds of thousands of dollars. Literally every month there are thousands of cards we reject. And so that, that savings can go back into the grading the ones that are actually that pass. And so that's the biggest thing. I mean, I've been in the hobby as a collector since 1976. I've had the business since 1991. Doug Giles, our head of grading, he was a customer of mine dating back to our first year in business. And then after closing his construction business, he joined us several years ago, and he has a phenomenal eye. and knows exactly what to look for. And because he screens thousands of cards per month, he knows what to look for. He'll come to me. He'll go, oh, that new select issue? Yeah, you need to look for this specific flaw. If this card, it's almost always off center. You need to be aware of that. And so because he goes through so many, he knows them like the back of his hand, which issues to look for. So when something comes in from a submitter, we already know on many of them what to look for ahead of time, what to be aware of. And so, an example, we used to get when Ohtani, spiked over the last few years, we got so many of his 2018 Bowman rookies. So many of those, the plain paper cardstock had like a haze. It was like a moisture. It looked like there was moisture under the surface of the card. And to the naked eye, it looks good. You put it under lighting and magnification, you're like, oh, that's an issue. That's going to be a low grade. And so we rejected a lot of Ohtani rookies with that exact issue. And so I could go down the list. There's so many specific flaws tied to specific cards, years, issues. And so you can't find that expertise on the corner. Like we've been doing it for so long, and we have such a phenomenal team. And so that's our mission, is serving this hobby and helping collectors with this. And so I think that's the biggest benefit. You get our expertise, you get our top level of service. As we say, we do all the heavy lifting. We do the screening. We write up the forms. Customers can send us, we had one submitter just send us 5,000 cards a few months ago. He just sent a box full of the cards. Nothing's written up, nothing's itemized, but he trusts us. So we screened his cards. We shipped back what didn't pass. We graded what did pass. And then at the tail end of it, he had a lot of nice slabs.
Yeah.
So
wow.
Yeah, we do all the hard stuff.
All the hard stuff for him. Cool.
Yeah.
And if you guys out there want to take advantage of Joe Davis's bulk grading submission service here at Got Baseball Cards, just go to sportscardinvestor.com. Click grading in the main menu bar, and you can do it right there through the sportscardinvestor.com website. Once again, sportscardinvestor.com, click grading. Joe, I appreciate it. Thank you for the update on all things grading.
Sure
we'll
thing.
Continue to stay in touch this year and probably bring the audience another episode about grading as the year goes on, as things change. But in the meantime, we just did a tour of your card shop, and we're going to be doing a video of that soon on the Sports Card Investor channel, so everybody will have to check that out. But thank you for having us out today.
Yeah, sure thing. Very welcome.
Absolutely. And I want to remind all of you out there that the full-length version of these Geoff Wilson shows is available not just on YouTube, on the Geoff Wilson Show channel on YouTube, but also on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify. So make sure you are subscribed to the Geoff Wilson Show everywhere. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon with our next one. Take care.